best strategies for staying injury-free in the weight room.
Yeah, I was very curious to get your perspective on this.
Well, it's like I said in the intro before we started recording. The best way to not get injured in the weight room, don't go. If you just stop training, you will not get hurt in the weight room. I can guarantee it. So that's my primary piece of advice, to stop training. Yeah, you might get injured doing other stuff, but you won't get injured in the weight room. Okay, now, somewhat shockingly to me, given what I have seen over, I mean, I've been lifting for, oh my God, 40 years. This one was like 15. Professionally, almost 30 now. Given what I've seen in the weight room, I'm actually surprised that the injury rates are as low as they are. Because they are. If you look at the statistics on the injury rates from weight training, it's a lot lower than you'd think. It's actually pretty low. Again, given what I've seen. Although then again, maybe I'm not seeing, like it's rare to see an acute injury. I've seen it, but maybe I'm not seeing the injuries in the weight room because the injured people are no longer showing up.
And by acute injury, just so we're clear, you mean something snapping while actively performing an exercise,
sure,
right?
Yeah,
as opposed to like wear and tear on a joint over time.
Yeah. I think I haven't looked at the studies in forever, but I think they're talking about more acute injuries, or like a muscle pull, or I mean, tears do occur, although that's usually under very specific situations. Like a truly, acute traumatic injury of the muscle pull, muscle tear,
I've had
tendon
two,
strain,
unfortunately.
sprain. Yeah, look,
both performing hip hinges.
Yeah. I mean, I injured a spinal ligament doing something stupid on deadlifts when I was younger, which is, I think, part of why I got real conservative real quick because I was lucky. Yeah, stuff like that. Where somebody, like I did see one, God, this was last year, a guy on the hack squat, and he'd had a previous back injury, and I think he popped a disc at the bottom of the hack squat, and he basically had to be removed in a ambulance. I mean, I witnessed one that I could be pseudo blamed for. This was many years ago, where a guy did get taken out in a stretcher, but it does happen.
Yeah, it does. But I mean, I've had two in 10 years.
Yeah.
And considering that I've done it on a frequent basis with high intensity in that time, it's not that bad. Like, compare it to other athletic activities. Rugby, for example. I'd have multiple, breaks by now, probably, and CTE.
American football players are wrecked. MMA, hell, skateboarding has a much higher injury rate than the weight room ever could. Which, again, surprises me given what I see, but the body is pretty resilient. Now, there's also the issue is, something my mentor really pointed out to me is when you're seeing a quote-unquote acute injury, it is frequently you are seeing the proverbial straw and the camel, right? You are generally seeing the buildup of long-term tissue trauma that, it's kind of like when a light bulb goes out and you go, but it was just working a minute ago. Well, yes, anytime something breaks, there is a T0 and a T-1, where at T-1, it was working, and now there has to be a point where you cross that line. So frequently you've got someone who may be overloading a muscle, getting chronic, some sort of micro damage, accumulation of it, whatever it is. Typically when you're seeing those types of injuries, you are seeing the final straw.
How can you detect or get around that kind of?
You can't. I mean, you can't. Generally speaking, you can't. Well, it depends on what it is. So there are videos, and do not Google these. Do not look at these. They showed this to me. I had this injury prevention or this injury class in college, and it's actually really cool. My professor wrote this book. I ran into him at a conference like a decade later, and man, I must have been a real pain in the ass in that class because he remembered me. I was pretty shocked, actually. He remembered me from UCLA, but he showed us these videos, and there were two different ones. And this also shows you just how difficult it is to actually get an injury like this. And it was an Olympic lifter and a power lifter. who both, during a lift, blew out both patellar tendons.
Wow.
Right? The Olympic lifter dipped for the jerk, and both of his knees went kabloosh, and he was on the floor. Same thing with a powerlifter. And I've seen other videos where this happens. Or you'll see often in bench pressing, pec tears.
Yeah.
Now, again, this was early 90s, right? Nobody knew nothing about nothing. But they went and did the math. The patellar tendon is so overbuilt. They calculated that it must have taken something like 20 times body weight joint reaction forces to blow that tendon. That's how thick the patellar tendon is. 20 times body weight. Now, realize if you're squatting 1,000 pounds, or if you're when you think about the dip, the downward acceleration, the catch and the reversal, that's a lot of force. But the other factor was anabolic steroid use, which we know over time can not only overstrengthen muscles, but can weaken connective tissues. And typically, like when you hear about bench press pec tears, it is almost invariably in anabolic steroid users, almost without exception. Now, I have a buddy.
The exception being Lane Norton.
Yeah, there are exceptions, but that will actually get sort of to the answer of this. Now, I had a buddy who tore a bicep in an office accident. He just hit something wrong.
That's horrible.
Yeah, but also there's something to consider.
Yeah, there was a YouTuber, Goku Flex, who tore his bicep, I believe, helping a friend move furniture.
Sure.
Nothing weight room related.
It's so gross because when the muscle pops, it rolls up like a window shade.
Don't look at bicep tear compilations.
Don't Google any weight room. I've got a buddy who sends me these damn things. He's like, I'm like, dude, just no. I don't like to. I never show them to my lifters, ever, because I do like, even as rare as it is, I do not want one of my lifters getting under a bar with even a 0.1% thought that yes, my knees could blow out. Like at a powerlifting meet, guy blew out a hamstring, ended up face down on the platform squatting. Like it happens. It doesn't happen often, but it usually happens at the absolute extremes of that level of performance. And there's a lot of anabolics in powerlifting, let's just be honest. So also do keep in mind, like different tissues tear at different rates, right? Muscle pulls are not that hard to get. I don't think it happens a lot in the weight room. It can. When people talk about blowing out a tendon, so that's not actually usually what's happening. So the tendon attaches to the bone, and it's at the bone, it's very, very, very strong. It's very rare to actually pull a tendon off of the bone. Where the tendon ties into the muscle at the musculotendinous junction, that's a lot weaker. Usually people say that, they're not tearing the tendon, they're ripping the muscle away from the tendon because that's a much weaker overlap. That's usually what's happening. So typically that's a torn bicep. That's, a torn pec. I mean, there could also be, like, you don't see this in the weight room, but like, we hear about, ACL injuries in sports, but that's usually, that's typically in high impact sports, American football. Women get it in non-impact sports where the knee gets into a very bad position and the ACL happens to go through a notch that acts like scissors. And if you get twisted just wrong, it goes kapoof. And if it gets really jacked out, you tear up the MCL and the PCL and the menisci. Like that's the full knee. But that's usually a football player who plants his foot and gets it bent out of position, right? Like even my injury, we were at the roller skating rink of all things. I haven't been on skates in years. I'm out there dorking around on my inlines. Some guy gets out of control, but my skate stuck. He hit me. So here's my skate. Here's my leg. He came in this way, ran into me. My skate stuck, and my leg went. But that's a traumatic injury. You don't really see that in the weight room.
Yeah, not so much.
Right? Now, I bonked my head on a nose breaker that went, like, there's a reason that those are called skull crushers and nose breakers, because I guarantee you at some point, one guy did it, right? You get to hear it and you go, oh, crap, boom, and you just donk yourself in the head. If you've ever Olympic lifted, every single person who's ever done a jerk has caught themselves in the chin at least once with the bar. You don't.
Oh yeah, it happens on the overhead press too. If it not the chin, then it's the nose. Especially if you're.
It's different on the jerk because you're exploding that thing. Oh, and if your tongue's out, you bite your tongue in it. Like, we're not talking about that stuff. We're talking about, the muscle pull. Like, now tendonitis, which is real common, right? It's not an acute injury, but it is a weight room related injury. And I don't know if that's included in the statistic. But even though like seriously acute injuries, you just don't see that often. And when you do, it's when something like when I was deadlifting, my low back started, I went from a flat back to a round back, I strained a spinal ligament. Like that's when you typically see that happen. You can see blown discs, but usually it's someone that, they're rounding out in a squat, compression flexion. What's been happening is that over time, the disc has been pushed, the jelly, right? So here's your discs, and then there's the jelly donut in the middle, the nucleus pulposus, and then there's this connective tissue in back. And if you're constantly rounding, you're pushing the jelly back into and it eventually kind of wears through. So when you're seeing that blown disc, what you're seeing is the long-term effects of poor lifting and long-term compression flexion, by which I mean the discs are meant to sit here, compression. If you're compression flexion, the disc is getting pushed. The jelly is getting pushed backwards into what a posterior hernia is, posterior disc bulge. Anterior herniations are extremely rare for reasons. So if you see that happen, it's usually, again, it tends not to just come out of the blue. It's usually the final step of the long-term consequence. Yeah. But that raises the question, okay, well, why? And really it comes down to just load management. Usually when you're seeing this, you're seeing the combination of, because like, as I like to say, there's two types of trainees. Those that have shoulder problems and those that are going to have shoulder problems. Almost in the modern era, that's probably the most common injury. But that's due to our love of the flat bench. That can absolutely be traced to the Western being enamored of the barbell bench press. Because all the old school lifters who are still around will tell you they never saw shoulder problems when people were doing the Olympic lifts and were not barbell bench pressing all the time.
Right.
But
okay, I guess a follow-up question could be, what role do you reckon exercise selection plays in injury prevention? Well, but we can come back to that.
Yeah, there's multiple factors. So part of it in general is simply load management. Now, load encompasses a lot of things, including frequency, intensity, and volumes, right? In terms of, you're looking at the overall load on the tissue. Those are really the key variables. Now, exercise selection does play a choice, right? There is probably something to the absolute load being lifted in terms of its stress on the joints, right? I mentioned 18 hours ago, and this is one of your questions we're probably not going to get to. One of the places blood flow restriction absolutely plays a role is when you're trying to find a way to increase the muscular stimulus while decreasing the absolute load on the joints, because it allows lighter weight because of the metabolic effects. It's great for injury. There are certain, like super slow is the same way. It's great when you're hurt. I think we mentioned that in the HIT discussion, because it decreases joint forces because it makes you use piddly weights. But as far as overall load, usually when you're seeing these types of injuries that are, what they are is it's chronic overloading that eventually results in acute injury. But people don't realize, they go, oh, he did this and pulled it. No, it was everything he did up to that. This is just when you finally saw it go. I'm sure there are exceptions to that, but we're talking weight room stuff. You're about like high performance sport. A sprinter will pull a hamstring seemingly out of the blue, but that's because of the nature of high speed sprinting and ending up in a overly stretched, contracted position. You're talking about weight room stuff that's not, by and large, the case.
Just to be clear, what are you referring to by load management?
Well, I mean, basically not chronically overloading a tissue with excessive frequency, volumes, and intensities so that you are overwhelming its long-term recovery. And where this really becomes important is I've been meaning to do, well, an article or a video for, a decade plus. That's how far behind I am on my work. But connective tissue is the forgotten tissue. All talk about muscle mass and this, and that, and the other, and how quickly it adapts and how to maximize train, all that other crap. Nobody talks about connective tissue because it's not interesting and it's not sexy and it's not exciting, but it's critical because muscle does recover pretty quickly from training. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
Connective tissue is much, much slower, both to adapt and to recover. And that's if you're talking about tendonitis, well, that's just inflammation of the tendon. It's right there in the name. Or tendinopathy, which I guess is the current proper term. Same thing. It is a chronic overload of the tendon that causes it to become inflamed. The muscle is not the problem. But if you do heavy triceps extensions 5 days a week or play tennis 5 days a week, that's how you get tennis and golfer's elbow, because it's the frequency of this doing lots of stuff that's stressing it without giving it a chance to recover.
So would you argue that one set performed every, 5 days a week would be more injurious compared to 5 sets one day?
Yes. There was a supposed study. I've never looked it up. I saw it referenced in a running newsletter a billion years ago, and I can't be bothered. Could be apocryphal. I don't care because I think it's true. Took 2 groups. They had one group run 1 mile 6 days a week. They had the other group run 2 miles 3 days a week. 6 day per week group got hurt, and the 3 day per week group didn't. Identical volumes. The difference was the 6 day per week group is hitting their connective tissue every day in a high impact activity, whereas the 3 day per week group was not. Look at every single person who jumped on that high frequency bodybuilding BS a few years ago. Oh, you should train the muscle group because the protein synthesis is over in 24 hours, and you should be training the muscle group 6 days a week. And yeah, they all got joint problems. The muscle is not the problem. The connective tissue is the problem. The joints are the problem because they don't adapt quickly. They don't recover quickly for various reasons. Hell, back in the day, they talked about training the attachments by doing like heavy isometric work because they're like, look, and the logic back in the day was like, look, the muscle's ability to transmit force to the bone is through the tendon. We need to strengthen the tendons, but that takes time. Like it takes, like bone is a good example, as a very slowly adapting tissue, and it is a connective tissue in the strictest sense. It takes like a year to see significant changes in bone mineral density of a few percent.
Would be nice if this was studied directly, the impact of frequency on injury rates.
It probably has, and I've never.
I think another way that frequency might lead to higher injury rates is that it allows for greater intensity on the days that you do train. Or it can anyway.
I'll
put it this way: like if you do 5 sets of triceps extensions on one day, they're going to get like progressive. You're going to get like progressively weaker set to set. Like assuming you're taking like normal rest intervals. Like either your last set will be limited by your first or vice versa. Whereas if you spread out that volume across 5 days, then you can really send it on every single one of those days.
Yeah, there's probably, but you could then counter argue, but the volume is so much lower. Maybe that's less stress I think I would agree with you more than not. That would be the counter argument. Oh, but it's only 1 set. So ergo, it's not as much stress. It's like, well, probably I don't think that's the case. And I think in practical terms, if you look at activities that are stressful to joints, running as a good example. Running has one of the highest beginner injury rates, which is reversed. Most activities, if you see increasing injury rates, it's the highest levels of performance when people are pushing the limits. Running is the exact opposite. And there's a reason for that, because it's high impact. And because people try to go from 0 to running volumes at a high frequency, and they get hurt. Why you should not run unless you're being chased, unless you follow a truly, truly intelligent program, and most people don't. I'm going to start running. I think I'll run 30 minutes every day, and they're hurting a week because their joints have to adapt, and it takes a long time. Even more so if they're running is a terrible way to get in shape. Running is, I don't agree with the general, I want to get in shape before I go to the gym. Running, you actually do have to get in shape to do first. You cannot, unless you weigh 120 pounds. Running is a terrible way to get into shape because you get hurt. And in my experience, anecdotally, being injured is not a great way to make progress. That is my general experience. But yeah, look at the people who like I said, everybody who did that high frequency BS and trained with any level of intensity. Yeah, if you piss around, I guess, they all got tendonitis. They all got joint problems. They all got without fail. There were people trying to do this high frequency squatting, unless they're doing incredible amounts of intensity cycling, right? Heavy, light, medium can work. If you're doing piss ass squatting 4 days a week and only going heavy, fine, it won't do you any good. Like it's still purposeless, but it can be done. But that's not what people do. Everybody who did that stuff got hurt. Everyone who's tried to follow Mike Israetel's BS MRV charts, training biceps 6 days a week, which is the most ridiculous crap ever. They all get elbow problems without fail. He doesn't because he's on drugs and he trains with less intensity than a 12-year-old.
There are a number of powerlifters who like bench every day and don't really have problems with that.
Well, but we also have an issue with survivorship bias. We also have an issue with people that are very so my training partner, right? He could do stuff that would just injure most people. Exercise tech because he had such robust joints. He'd also been training for 17 years. Like you can adapt to that over time to some degree. But the majority of people, because again, and that's the problem. I see a lot of people, they always go, oh, well, studies of lifetime runners don't have arthritis. Yeah, they're survivors because they all weigh 120 pounds and had certain body types. The ones who got injured aren't running anymore. It's very, very simple. It is survivorship bias. When people get away with this, A, it's the survivors. B, they build up to it over years, right? Everyone likes to invoke the Bulgarians. They create Olympic lifters, and the system broke 1 out of 65 out of 66 people. Because when people try to do that, and especially if they jump into it, they get hurt. You're only seeing the survivors by definition. Now, but and again, I think if you look at the handful of, and there's not a lot of powerlifters that do it. Every once in a while. Okay, Jim Williams was an early one. But you have to look at how he actually trained. So he would go in and he would warm up and he would work up to a single at 90%. If it felt good, he'd go for a PR. If it felt bad, he'd stop. 1 rep. He also did that after a decade of training. He was one of the best bench pressers in the world. He was also on drugs. But he wasn't doing high volume 6 days a week. He'd work up to a heavy weight. If it didn't feel good, he was done. That's not how most people do this. People who bench every day go in and do 4 sets to failure with their buddies doing forced repetitions and then do it again the next day. And then a day later, and they're maxing out every single workout. I think when you look at people that are doing that, they're using a lot of intensity cycling. They're using a lot of that's very different. Training lift 4 days a week where only 1 day is truly heavy and there's a light, a medium heavy day is completely different than trying to go Bulgarian 1RM 6 days a week. Now, even with that, you can get away with ludicrous stuff for short periods of time. And I mean ludicrous, because I've done it. There's studies that have done it for short periods of time, by which I mean maybe a month is right on the cusp. You can do ludicrous stuff.
Yeah.
For me, it was usually about 6 weeks, and then I would break. There was a classic study back in, I want to say the 2000s by Fry. They were trying to generate overtraining in the weight room, which they've really never been able to do because weight training tends to be inherently self-limiting. These guys, they did 10 singles at 100% of 1RM on a squat machine every day for 2 weeks. Everybody got stronger. It was 2 weeks of 1 lift for 10 singles. The study everyone likes to invoke on that high frequency thing was it'll come to me. A couple of years ago, they took 3 lifters. It was a case study, and they had them squat to 1 RM 30 days in a row. And they took like 5 days off. They were going to do daily max every day for 30 days. They took like 5 days off, and then they tested them. And like one of the guys gained like 5%. One of them gained a lot more, but their squat was actually lower than what I squatted. Their Olympic lifter that was squatting less than I was squatting. So I'm not too. Okay, great. They did 1 lift, daily max. They all got real tired. And we have to ask, did they make meaningfully more gains than they would have training traditionally? Study just came out. A buddy of my guy in my group, really good guy named Lee Bell, was on. They're trying to generate functional overreaching with squatting. So they squatted 5 days in a row. 5 sets, 80% of 1 RM, either to a 40% velocity drop or failure, which are pretty close. And they got about 5 sets a day. 5 days in a row. That's hard. And then they gave them like a week off, and they came back and they were like 5% stronger. But that's 5 days. 30 days, 2 weeks. You can do absolutely ludicrous stuff. Because again, I've done it. But I knew at 6 weeks I would break. Physically, emotionally, psychologically. And that's the problem. That's not what most people do. The guy that you see bench pressing 2 or 3 times a week, maxing out 3 days a week, what else do you see? Elbow wraps, because his elbows are bothering him. Wrist wraps, not for support, because his wrists are bothering him. Back in the day, you used to see women on the Stairmaster with both knees, with knee sleeves, with knee wraps on, because they were doing 2 hours of hard Stairmaster 6 days a week. Load management. Whereas you take the guy that's doing 1 heavy bench press workout once a week and 1 light bench press workout once a week, it doesn't happen in terms of overall load management. That's what it comes down to. Not only not overloading, constantly overloading the tissue, so they become constantly inflamed. And eventually, like I said, microdamage starts to accumulate. Actually, overtraining is related to local inflammation. It's a separate thing. Like your body will start to tell you if you're smart enough to listen. But most people are not. They're benching. Their elbows start to hurt. Somebody in my group just asked this. He's like, yeah, this and this, and well, like my elbows are hurting and I can't seem to fix it. Should I just start wearing elbow wraps when I bench? Like, no, you should fix the problem and stop being a numbnuts. I'm like, you don't band-aid the problem and keep driving yourself deeper into the hole. Because eventually you will go from minor annoyance to 6 months of training loss when you finally push this tissue over the edge.
Yeah, and the fix is, as you put it earlier, basically load management.
Right.
It's not to say stop training completely. It's just manage what you're doing better.
Sure. And sometimes that is sufficient. You may have to do direct rehab. Sometimes you need, but I think also if you look at like the successful athletes who do get away with what seems like heavy loading, you see a lot more intelligent programming than, let's face it, you just don't see with bodybuilders. Okay. Now, there are exceptions. And I think Westside is not even the exception that proves the rule, it's the rule that proves the rule. Somehow, Louis, RIP, and make no mistake, Louis was a genius. He was an innovator.
Yeah.
Love him or hate him, you cannot deny his contributions. Okay, so keep it. When I say this is just all I'm saying is making observation. How he read the Russian manuals, which I've read all of them, and I do not recommend that you read any of them. How he read those and got to Westside is beyond me. Because at no point, no Russian coach has ever maxed out 52 weeks of the year. Ever. Ever. And somehow he came up with a system where you literally maxed in the ME exercises 52 weeks a year. It was nuts. Now, his logic, well, we're ready to go to a competition any week. Why is this valuable? Powerlifting competitions are not sprung on you like a pop quiz. And For any success West Side Training did or did not have, every single one of its lifters were constantly wrecked. Part of the reason they had to wear squat shorts during their ME workouts is because all of their hips were destroyed from that wide stance, foot forward, box squatting, maxing out 52 weeks of the year. Dave Tate and Jim Wendler are both physically destroyed because that was not good load management. Now, contrast that to, say, Ed Cohn, who would work up to a peak. He would drop back to like 50% of max. And over the next 12 to 16 weeks, he would build back up to a new peak. Now, he had a couple minor injuries. He had a pec tear. He had a hamstring tear, because when you're squatting 1,000 pounds, shit happens. But big picture stuff, he didn't have a lot of injuries, comparatively speaking, for as long as his career was. Look at, this also goes to the exercise selection. Dorian. He had the one big bicep tear, which is what caused him to retire. But by and large, very injury-free. And you look at him now, he's in great shape. He did mostly machines. Volume was very under control. He even says now he wishes he deloaded more frequently. And he wishes he'd been less intense during contest prep. Now, I know this seems a little bit tasteless given what's going on, but I know Ronnie Coleman is very sick right now, and I'm not trying to dump on the guy. He went super heavy triples, squats, barbell, his entire career, and he's a walking injury. And I think there's a lesson to be had here. You can go heavy, but if you're trying to max out and go heavy, even at low volume with certain type, stuff wears out.
Yeah.
I cycled things very, Sumi trained a lot. She did train 6 days a week. She trained each lift 3 times a week. That was but her volumes were very low. The intensities were cycled. And I was very, very, very attuned. Again, adjusting the training. I mean, she did 8 singles in the squat on any given workout, and one day was light. Every time she hit a new peak, she would back off for 3 weeks, and we would build her up. The volumes were I never buried her in volume. I was very, very careful. Anytime something started to get a little twingy, which it did every once in a while, I would adjust it, because you can't keep pushing into that, because it doesn't magically get better. And that's not what most people do.
Just coming back to West Side, I know one cornerstone of West Side programming was exercise rotation. Would you factor that in as part of load management, or do you reckon it's relatively minor consideration?
Maxing is maxing is maxing is maxing. Is maxing.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. From your joints perspective, it doesn't matter. Whether you're doing a 2-board press, 4-board press, 3-board press, if you're maxing, you're maxing. And it's going to hit your elbows and shoulders. There ain't no difference. That's not why they rotated exercise. Now, I know there is a belief that I don't agree with, and this is neither here nor there, that using the same exercises over and over and over will eventually cause connective tissue injuries due to, it's like the idea of a chronic overuse, like carpal tunnel. And maybe that's contextually true if you're doing a ton of volume all the time, but I've never seen it in anyone I've worked with. But I don't use massive volumes, and I don't train people all out all the time.
Yeah, you do the occasional deload.
Yeah, exactly.
2 easy weeks,
of whatever sort, whether it's 2 easy weeks or reduce the volume or take a few days, whatever it is. So I know that belief is out there, and I think contextually it might be true, but I don't think exercise rotation per se fixes anything, because you can, if you're still loading that elbow, if you're loading that elbow or wrist or shoulder maximally, it's maximal. It's maximal. Their rotation was a weak point thing, and I don't want to debate. I don't want to discuss West Side, because again,
understandable.
Oh God Almighty! I mean, like I said, it contributed a lot, but there was a lot of stuff that, again, if you read the Russian manuals, it was gibberish.
Yeah. Okay. So you're not really. I
don't
think exercise rotation is a big
aspect
of load management.
Volume, load, intensity, or frequency. It's the whole, or it all contributes.
Okay. Do you think warm-ups play a role in preventing injury, and to what degree?
I mean, maybe like you're certainly not going to go under a max barbell and go immediately. Like you need to warm up those tissues, I guess, but you can still, I mean, what's funny is like as often as not, injuries occur during warm-ups. I usually like when I did frequently.
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny. Like I was arching with 20 kilos on the bench press, and I was like, oh, my mid back feels really, really bad. And
and it's because I think a lot of people don't focus as much during warm-ups. They're not paying as much. I used to find when I was warming up, like my warm-ups felt harder than the work sets, but that's just because I wasn't putting mentally the same amount of focus into the warm-ups frequently. I mean, they do in terms of like they're warming up the tissue, they're preparing the nervous system. Like, absolutely, I think it is, but is that going to prevent an acute injury if it's time? Like, if it's time, you know, when you see that stuff happen, when you see the guy pull a hamstring at the powerlifting meet, he did the same damn warm-up he did every day for the last 12 weeks. The problem being that he came in with too much fatigue. Whenever I saw people at powerlifting meets, and people are going to hear this and go, you know, they're going to get all pissy at me, and that's fine. But like, if the day of the meet, you're having to spend 30 minutes with the massage gun to work out all the tightness in your tissue, you're not recovered, right? Like you are coming into it still carrying way too much cumulative fatigue. If your tissue is that torn up all the time and you're having to go through that constantly, you are clearly not recovering completely. And when you look at the training that's being done in those situations, it absolutely stands out in terms of constant high volume, high intensity. In powerlifting, frequency is so variable, but even so, even if you're just like, if you're doing maxing out squats every week, 52 weeks of the year, and doing high volume donkey work, I mean, the West Side has a ton of volume of hypertrophy work, which is still another stress. And that was with all the drugs known to God, man, and they were still hurt all the time.
You can definitely get injured with low volume training as well. Like it's not as common; it's much harder to do. But you know, I've done it.
Don't anybody mishear this. Like things can go wrong at any point, and a tissue can, you know. But by and large, you're looking at this chronic. It is chronic load management that is what's fundamentally catching up with people. Now, let's talk about Lane. Lane maxes out every lift every time he trains, and that's why he's blown his back out twice. Not to mention that his squat technique is tragic, even if he gets all pissy about anyone who tries to tell him that it could be better. There's a reason Lane had 2 catastrophic back injuries, and that's because he thinks every set should be taken to an 11 RPE every day, every week. Now, admittedly, he's had success. He's set some records. He's gotten away with it, and he's paid a hefty price that did not need to be paid because there's better ways.
Like there are lots of world record holding powerlifters who don't get injured like that all the time.
Exactly. Good luck telling him that, because as a scientist and a PhD, he believes that if you don't squat more than him, you don't know more than him, because, you know, academics. But yeah, that's a perfect example of it. One of my favorite things. This is super petty, but it's funny as hell. Matt Gary, who I've invoked his name a lot because I think very highly of him, is apparently the coach of the U.S. powerlifting team. Apparently that's a thing, which I wasn't aware of until a few years ago. I'm like, wow, we have a powerlifting team? Okay. He was talking about training intensity, and I forget, some podcast that I listened to by him. And he was like, yeah, I found that in my earlier career, I tended to get hurt a lot by trying to work, you know, at like 10 RPE at 0 reps in reserve all the time. And I found that I stopped getting injured when this is him talking mostly, like, let's just put it the way it is. I stopped getting hurt when I stopped training like Lane Norton. And I just thought it was a really hilarious call out, because he was like, yeah, I realized it wasn't necessary. It wasn't productive. And not only that, it was detrimental. Because again, my anecdotal experience, catastrophic injuries are not good for long-term progress. And I think that's, if you look at the differences between, in any sport, the athletes that are and are not getting chronically injured, it's the ones who are chronically doing excessive volumes and intensities and frequencies that are, and the ones that are not doing that are not, no matter how they're approaching it. And again, different sports, cycling, it's very, very hard to get hurt. You can shake your butthole raw, but it's very, very hard to get hurt if you're biking, because you just ride miles, right? You just do. Your low back can get sore, but running, it's real easy. Running has a huge injury.
Yeah, you can get into accidents on a bike, though.
Oh,
it's just the cycling itself that is injurious.
Swimming, you do get overuse injuries. Why? Because they do massive volumes twice a day, 6 days a week. They have endemic shoulder problems. That's a crime. But again, load management. And in the modern era, they're moving away from those volumes, and I bet they're seeing less injuries. It's also a very repetitive, if you're only doing freestyle and only getting an internal rotation, like you have to, this brings us back to the exercise selection thing, which is part of it. Is I suspect swimming, I don't understand. I'll never understand the training. I've tried for years. I don't get it. I never will. And I don't have to anymore. But I think if you look at swimmers, it wouldn't surprise me if the ones that swim multiple strokes that have different movement patterns that are spreading out their volume probably get less injured than specialists. I know I at least read at one point, I don't know if this is still true, that triathletes tended to get less injured than in the individual sport athletes. Because, cyclists are just cycling. It's the same pattern. That's all they do. Swimmers swim, runners run. Triathletes, by having to spread out their volume, also by working musculature frequently in opposing, like runners tend to get hamstring pulls, cyclists tend to get quad issues. If you're doing both, you're working the musculature a little bit more evenly. And then, of course, swimming is mostly upper body. So I think in part of it, certain types of injuries can be predisposed by muscular imbalances that occur due to, because again, when did shoulder problems in the weight room really show up? When people got so enamored with the barbell bench that they stopped doing any other movements. And also, as much as I crapped on the overhead press, before that, everybody overhead pressed, and that did interesting things with the serratus and the shoulder girdle, and kept a level of mobility because you had to push, behind the head that the barbell bench didn't. You got guys who were doing so much barbell bench, right? You start to get that. Now that's putting the rotator cuff in a very poor mechanical position. So you start to get impingements. Take the average guy, what is he doing? 20 sets for chest, and then 3 or 4 piss-ass sets for back, where he's not even using his scapular retractors, right? If you maintain better balance across joints. Back in the day, this isn't really a thing anymore. They used to link knee problems. They talked about the quadriceps to hamstrings ratio, and it was all isokinetic. This is this is a million years ago. They would use isokinetic machines, and they're like, all right, if the quad to hamstring ratio is out, because like in something like sprinting, you have heel strike. Now the quad has to stabilize the knee as the foot comes around, and now the hamstring is firing explosively. And if the quads tend to cause anterior tibial translation, the shin moves forward, and the hamstrings keep that stabilized. So the idea was like, okay, if your quad ham ratio is out, then you're more likely to have your shin move forward and pull on the ACL and blah, 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 blah. And I don't think that is held to be so much the case. Although one of the reasons that women are more likely to get ACL tears than men, there's a whole host of them for reasons that I'm not sure of. On like heel strike, on landing or jumping or sprinting, women's hamstrings fire like 100 milliseconds slower than men's. I don't know why, but that is long enough that if the tibia, if the shin gets pulled out of position because the hamstring hasn't fired to stabilize it, and a whole bunch of other things go wrong, the ACL gets cut. 100 millisecond difference due to, and a lot of what they're doing with ACL tear prevention is neurological retraining. Train women's muscle hamstrings to fire sooner, to better stabilize at the knee. Now that's an extreme, but it just goes to make the point. Someone who's doing all the benching and barely working their back, and they're usually working their back badly, Because, what are you seeing? Dude, I don't feel my back. Yeah, we'll do it right. Well, it's not even that. It's not even the effort. It's this. They're like, why don't I feel my back? I don't know. Maybe because your shoulders aren't moving. I don't know, because you're getting zero scapular retraction would be my guess. So, in that sense, another, nobody does direct rotator cuff work. Everybody probably should, but I'll be honest, I don't do it either. It's boring and lazy. It's very rare to see. Just to keep the rotator cuff firing well. Because when the shoulder gets out of position and the rotator cuff can become reciprocally inhibited by tightness and et cetera, now it's not firing well. Now you start to get an impingement because now the head of the humerus yanks up into the acromion prime and jacks that area up, to put it in technical terms, and starts to pinch the tendon. And then that further inhibits things down the road. And all of a sudden you've got a shoulder impingement. And then that's a big, big hassle. And that's because your rotator cuff became dysfunctional because your technique was bad and it was never getting trained in any sort of external rotation movement. It's a lot of why I use face pulls with Suni for rear delts. Because I had her do them here with a little bit of external rotation with a tricep rope, because I wanted to make sure and keep her shoulder girdle healthy. But I also kept the volumes very balanced. And she did a lot of back work. So that can contribute. Another partial contributor to elbow issues. Everything we do is grip. It's this. When's the last time you ever did that movement against resistance? Never. And that can be a problem. You get
unless you do like the funny rice bucket thing where you have those elastic bands or whatever.
Yes, or rubber bands, or you can get putty. Obviously, if you're going to do Qi Kung, do the stand, and then you do the rocks, and then you do the molten steel, and then you can just punch a man and show him his heart. Okay, too many kung fu movies, but yeah, nobody. I've seen one person in 30 years in a commercial gym do it. I was watching him. He was doing some tricep work, and in between, I saw him doing rubber bands, and I had to ask. I go, dude, trying to fix an elbow problem? He goes, nope, I want to make sure I never have one. One guy, 30 years. I've never done
Brilliant.
it. Well, and that is an issue. So there can be, I think those are going to contribute more to chronic issues. Like, I don't think that imbalance is going to necessarily cause the acute injury. I think that's just a little bit. Right? Doing more back work is not going to change. If you're doing 20 sets of bench and maxing out 2 days a week, all the back work in the world is not going to prevent you that problem. It may prevent the shoulder girdle issue, but it's not going to prevent you overloading the pec tendon, the elbow tendonitis. Like, it will, but it might prevent the inevitable rotator cuff problem down the road.
So I think, do you believe more in correcting strength imbalances and muscle imbalances or volume imbalances? Because the two are different. Because you can, you can do a high volume specialization program where, say, you're doing like 4 times the amount of chest pressing compared to rowing and pull downs combined.
Sure.
Where, like, despite the volume imbalance, your back and chest are about as strong as each other.
Yeah, but that goes back to, there's a reason my specialization programs are only 6 weeks.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not fundamentally why, but it is the fact that in that short term, this is more of a long-term thing. If someone is doing 20 sets for chest and 4 half-ass sets for back, they are going to get, now, when I write up programs, I do tend to balance them, although that's probably more to do with slightly obsessive compulsive need for symmetry. It's a weird visual thing. I was talking to someone the other day, and their whole workout, they're like, I do 10 sets of 10, 8 sets of 8, 20 sets of 20. I'm like, yeah, I get it. There's a symmetry to it. I go, it's nothing. And I actually, when I program, I was trying to make some changes to their training. I actually pandered to their crazy, because you have to. I mean, it's just part of the deal. And so the workouts I wrote up, I was like, yeah, I'm going to give you 8 by 8 on this, because I know you need to see that visual symmetry. Another one of our exercises was 10 by 20, and it was 20 by 10, because Humans are nuts.
20 by 10 sounds nuts.
Yeah, well, that's a whole separate thing. But my point being that I think as much as anything, when you look at the workouts I write up, the volumes tend to be fairly symmetrical, more because it's a visual thing for me. I'm just like, must pair, horizontal push, horizontal pull, vertical-ish push, vertical-ish pull, delts kind of stand on their own, biceps, triceps.
Yeah, I don't know if the symmetry thing is just some kind of, idiosyncratic neurosis of yours. I think
it's a little bit of both.
One of the judging criteria in bodybuilding.
Yeah,
symmetry.
But it's not even
balanced development everywhere.
So this is just hilarious. Again, this is one of those old school things that you're too young to remember. Because you will occasionally see arguments. Oh, that different muscle groups require different volumes. Reasons? Because. Look at Mike's MRV charts. There's no rationality to any of it. No, there's not. Why is this muscle this many sets, this many days a week, and this other one? Because reasons. Because the whole
where are the data?
Because the whole thing got pulled out of his ass.
Yeah.
Back in the day, this is awesome. Bodybuilders or
the excessively high maintenance volume. Sorry, I don't mean to prolong this, but for a while it was like, you'll grow on 10 sets of chest pressing, but 8 sets of chest pressing and maintenance. It's like, why?
What is the minimum volume that you have to do to at least maintain your chest size? Generally speaking, about 8 sets a week for chest.
Absurd.
Like, that's a 2-set difference.
But there was a belief at one point that the triceps,
I could be wrong about that, sorry, but keep going.
Doesn't matter. That the triceps needed 33% more volume than the biceps. Can you guess why?
Oh, yeah. Hang on. So you just mentioned that, because they have one more head.
Yeah, there's 3 heads versus 2. Ergo,
the triceps. I mean, they have one more head.
Of course. Yeah. Which, by that logic, the quadriceps would need, whatever.
Yeah.
So in a sense, there is. Like, I think, if you looked at it more biomechanically, like again,
1.3 recurring. Never mind.
Well, whatever. Exactly. Yes, Leroy Jenkins. Yeah, go. I know you get that reference.
Yeah, I do. Of course, I do.
Where they're asking the nerd what the
he's going in.
No, but they're asking. They've got one of the nerds, and he's doing the calculations on the likelihood of the raid succeeding. Because based on my calculations, we've got a success rate of 35.33%. That's 0.33 repeating, of course. But he had to explicitly make that note. God forbid someone think that it was not 0.33 infinitely. Anyway, I digress. Nerd. So yeah, like, okay, the back is a more complex muscle group, and an argument could potentially be made that you might need more sets to work everything. I would counter that by going, not if you pick your exercises correctly. And I think you probably, you could make an argument like, okay, the chest, there's a middle section, there's an upper, sternoclavicular. You could potentially, maybe it needs more than the biceps that only has really one line of pull. Like, yeah, but again, these are micro issues that only might matter at the highest level. So generally speaking, when I drop workouts, I tend to make them fairly balanced in volumes in terms of opposing muscle groups and target. There are exceptions, but those exceptions usually represent a situation where someone is already imbalanced in a different way, right?
Yeah.
And it's almost it's not even a specialization thing, but if someone's like, look, for whatever reason, I've already got this one really well-developed body part, and I don't particularly care about bringing it up. I don't particularly, or whatever. In that case, I'll write a workout. I'm like, fine, that's maintenance volumes, or do it whenever, or don't do it. Who gives a crap? Like, if you feel like do a couple sets at the end of the workout, it's fine. Like, so let's say I did have someone who came to me and they'd been doing your typical endless bench, not enough back work. I might very well write up a program that was deliberately imbalanced towards back in that case. But it would simply be using an imbalanced program to correct an existing imbalance. And here's a favorite story. I once made a guy taller. I'm just that good. Years ago, I was working at this commercial gym here in Austin. Guy came in. He had been doing nothing but push-ups and crunches every day for 2 years. He looked like a question mark.
What do you mean he looked like a question mark?
That was his costume. He looked like that.
Yeah.
And he only worked this. So me being the super coach, I had him work on nothing but upper back and back extensions. And he was 2 inches taller in about a month because he could finally stand up straight. So there are rare exceptions. But if you're talking me writing up, or also like I've had this come up in some consults lately. And this is something, whenever I see this, I always think it's weird, but I do totally get it. Like I'll get consultations from, I'm going to say physique competitors, but by like women in some of the less muscular divisions. I don't know what you want to call that. Physique, fitness, figure, bikini, wellness, whatever this crap is.
There are many.
Yes, there are too many, and I can't keep up with it because it's all silly. But I'll look at these workouts and I'll be like, what the what? Like, what is this? Like, where's the chest work? Where's the what? And then they'll go, well, I have implants and chest doesn't matter. I'll go, oh, okay, that makes total sense. Someone I consulted with for his wife, and he's like, yeah, they're in, I don't know, wellness. I don't remember. Like I said, it all kind of blends into me. And I'm like, yeah, we don't do a lot of quad work because big quads detracts from the size of the glutes and the hamstrings because then I'm like, okay, cool. Like, this is all very silly to me, but whatever. I'm adaptable. And it was
I can't believe they don't know that traps are among the sexiest muscles in women. Haven't you heard?
Oh, really? That's news to me. Okay. But are we talking about traps 1 or traps 2, 3, and 4? Or 2 and 3?
1.
Traps 1. Okay. Well, cool.
From Mike Israel. You know, he has a video where he's like ranking the sexiest muscles in women. He says traps are among them.
I have no words. Yeah, because that's what every woman really wants is a yoke. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Dude, you must check out Greg Doucette's critique of that video. It's the funniest.
Oh, God. So yeah, so there will be times
sorry about that digression
when where I will make. But if you're that's a me coaching thing. If I'm writing something up, if I'm writing like the generic bulking routine or a beginner routine, or those basically. Specialization is by definition, it's meant to be volume imbalanced, but that's specifically, and that's also for advanced people who are already well developed everywhere and just need to bring up, like, that's a specific situation. For a beginner routine, I'm going to give a balanced program. This is part of why I don't like, and maybe this can come into the next one. I know you had a question about minimalism, right? This is why, like, a lot of these, like, oh, just do these 3 minimal big lifts. And I'm like, yes, and you will end up with the most imbalanced strength and muscularity that you could ever want. And this is dumb to just do these only 3 things because you will end up completely screwed down the road, right? Like, you look at my beginner routines, that'll have, quad movement, a hamstring movement, maybe calves, chest, mid-back, shoulders, lats, bicep, tricep, abs, low back. It is balanced completely. Now, yeah, I suppose, there's the thing, again, big in the 2000s, not so much now, all the corrective exercises, we got to spend 6 months correcting all, like that. NASM had a whole thing that, like, which NASM was one of the better ones, but like that was the whole thing for a while. Like, we must just do a zillion corrective movements before we even get into real training. And I'm like, I think we can find a happy medium between these two. You can pick the right exercises that will be kind of corrected if you do it, but whatever. So, like, yeah, if someone had some super imbalance coming in, but this would be in a coaching context that I could see what was going on, I might briefly address that specifically. I mean, my female clients thought I was a magician because I could fix their decades-long knee problem in about 2 weeks.
Yeah, terminal knee. extensions.
Yeah, they thought I was a god among men. I'm like, no, not really. This is pretty simple stuff. I could fix rotator cuff problems in about most basic rotator cuff problems, like 2 weeks, just by doing some basic fixes, stretch and strengthen. But by and large, you look at the generic bulking routine, and it is completely balanced volumes across. I'm very attentive to that, just for the reason that over time, eventually, super imbalanced programs cause problems. But again, which goes back, so as usual, we got way off topic. But I think any injuries that exercise selection in terms of maintaining, balance across the joints, which is what people usually talk about, I think it's going to be preventing or even addressing a different type of injury, right? Like, so someone's got, a mechanical low back pain that I might be able to link to either weak spinal erectors or, weak, whatever it is. Like, yeah, I might throw something a little bit different at that just to try to, if I think there's, right now, the whole idea of strength imbalances in the postmodern era of rehab, there are no strength imbalances. There's no such thing as proper posture. It's all psychosocial. Yeah, no. It can be more than one thing. It can be more than two things, believe it or not. Sometimes it can even be three things. So let's maybe look at this a little bit more contextually. So the reality is that stretch and strengthen from a rehab standpoint still works more often than it doesn't. There's just more to it than that. So there would be times where I might be a little bit more, but by and large, general basic training, I want balance. I've got a buddy, I was going to tell this story. We were talking about split routines, and I don't generally use push-pull legs for reasons. It's not I tend to gravitate towards upper lower by and large. And he was like, yeah, he's like, I use push-pull legs. And I was like, well, okay, well, describe it to me. And he showed it to me, and it was a very reasonable volume, intelligent exercise selection. And I go, right, that's the difference. The way most people set up push-pull legs is push day is 20 sets for chest, 20 sets for delts, and 20 sets for tricep. His was like 6 sets for chest, 3 or 4 sets for delts, 3 or 4 sets. Like, it was very, he chose to split it that way, but he kept the volumes reasonable. My experience is when people go to body part splits, they figure, well, I'm only training 1 or 2 muscle groups. I better do all the volume. And they screw themselves up that way. So, and hilariously, we had that little discussion, and I had a consultation like a week later, and it was someone who younger guy, wanted to train 5 days, and I'll be damned if I didn't set him up a moderate volume push-pull legs. And I emailed my buddy, and I was like, yeah, so no sooner did I crap on PPL than I recommended it to someone who's like, it serves you right. I'm like, yeah, it does. But again,
was it like a rotating 5-day PPL?
Yeah, exactly. He's like, he was used to training that many days a week, but when he came to me, he's like, yeah, so what had happened, he'd done something that was almost like a high frequency upper lower training shoulders 4 days a week. And he's like, then I came across your video talking about how invariably the shoulder girdle gives out. And then I got hurt, and I thought maybe I should talk to you, because that's exactly what happened. He was training his shoulder girdle 4 to 5 days a week because of a split routine, and it wrecked him. I said, okay, well, let's not do that. And so the way it ended up being, it's like, look, it's 5 days a week, not usually my preference, but if the volumes are kept under control, which most people don't do, it's fine. He was young. He liked being in the gym. I had the volume very constrained, and I'm like, look, this way you're only hitting the shoulder girdle 3 days on any given week. You got, 2 or 3, I think that's right. Push, pull, legs, push. 4, but with 3 days off, the volumes are under control. You're not doing, medial delt 4 days a week. I'm like, and I go, and if you feel like you're getting into trouble, drop one of the upper body days for a couple weeks until your shoulders feel better. But it can be done. The reason I don't, again, this goes back to what we're talking about with like what I can write versus what I can program. As soon as I tell someone to use a push-pull legs, they're going to jack the volumes up, or, God forbid, the dumb once a week muscle group, those types of training. Because they're always like, well, if I'm only going to train chest, I'm already at the gym, I might as well do an hour. And they do 20 sets of piss-ass chest work. I'm like, yeah, why don't use those? Because that's what people always do. always. At least push-pull legs, they got a few muscle groups, but they still do too much volume most of the time. It can be set up, but only if I'm programming it. Because people are like, well, I'm already at the gym. I just will do more sets. No, I'll just make you do an upper lower so that you won't do that.